Okay, the next thing we need to do is when someone scores, we need to somehow reset the game so that the next round can happen and keep track of their score, obviously. So the next thing we're going to need is probably a reset function. So let's quickly make, this is part 6, right? Okay. So we're going to make a new function here at the top of the file. We're going to call it reset. I'm using capitals because it is a big part of how the game runs and all the other important things we've done so far. See, draw, inputs, reset, tick, and updates are all capitals because they are core functionality, and then the checkball collisions one is lowercase because that's a utility function, kind of an extra thing. We'll try to be consistent with this as we go. So what do we need to reset? Well, obviously the ball. So ball.x goes back to where it was at the beginning of the game. Ball.y goes back to where it was at the beginning of the game. We can theoretically at this point also, oops, it'll be ball.dx. The reason we need to say ball dot is because this over here is inside ball. So even though it doesn't show the ball dot bit here, it is encapsulated, as they say, inside this object. So we need to access it inside the object. We can change the delta, the trajectory of the ball at this stage. But I kind of like the idea that the ball keeps traveling in the direction it was going. Every time I've played Pong as a kid or whenever, the person that scores, so if player 1, if paddle 1 scores a point, they get to serve. So the ball should keep traveling in the direction it was traveling. So for the time being, we're just going to leave that where it is. Okay. Now, this is not strictly necessary right now, but it is a nice little detail to add. TIC has, since version 1, I think, in other words, since official release, because it was in early access for years, but since it went version 1.0, they've added this boot function. Now what boot does, see it's green because it's a core function. What boot does is once the whole cart, a file, a game is called a cart, like a cartridge. Once a cart is fully loaded and everything is in memory, the boot function executes once. It initializes whatever it needs to initialize, and then it starts ticking. It starts running the tick function, 60 times a second. So in boot, we can put anything that we want to do at the beginning of the game when it loads that can't be set statically. So, like these positions and things we can set as the initialized values of the things, and we know that's what they're going to be at the beginning of the game. But sometimes if the game gets complicated or complex, there are certain things that you cannot set beforehand because it relies on other things to exist and so on. Anyway, just for consistency and making sure that everything does what it's supposed to later on when the game gets complicated, I'm going to call reset once at the beginning. Because now we can put all our initialization code in here. All the things we want to be in a particular situation at the beginning of a round goes here. Because when the game starts up, that's also the beginning of a round, although everybody's score would still be 0. Okay, let's leave this for a second because I'm talking about scores, and if somebody's going to score, we're going to have to track those scores. So these are constants, they need to be at the top. Paddles are constants, the ball is kind of a constant, I guess. So here, let's make 2 new globals. Call it P1 score, and the player starts with a score of 0, and P2 score will also start with a score of 0. This I am not adding to reset because we don't want the score to reset every time someone scores. That defeats the entire purpose. So scores are set to 0 at the beginning when the cart loads, and then as people score, the score goes up. For the time being, you can just decide amongst yourselves, we're playing first to 10 points, and then when you hit 10 points you go, yay, I won, and then just reboot the cart, start the game over, you know, press Control R or go out and type run again to reset the thing. Later on we'll do menu systems and so on if we want to spend that much time on it, but you'll always have the option to just restart the cart. So player score for player 1 and player 2, or paddle 1, paddle 2, left and right, however you want to look at it. Where do players score? In updates. Okay, we know this is for the ball bouncing, this is for the ball hitting a paddle. Ball to paddle. Now what happens if it misses a paddle? So how do we know? Let's start with player 1 scoring. How do we know player 1 has scored? Is when the ball is off the right edge of the screen. So if ball.x is greater than the width of the screen, then P1 score becomes itself plus 1, and then magic, do that. Oops. That'll put the ball back in the middle of the play field on the net, and the next round starts. How do we know when player 2 has scored? If ball.x, so if the ball's x position, now we can't just say 0 is less than 0, because then the ball will technically still be visible when player 2 scores, because it's the left edge of the screen and 0 is on the left edge and the ball still extends to the right. We need the right edge of the ball to be off the edge of the screen. So if ball's x position plus the size is less than 0, then we know P2 has scored. Player 2 has scored is equal to P2 score plus 1. And then we also reset. So if all has gone well, what we will see is the ball leaves the edge of the table on either side, edge of the play field, the board, the screen, on either side, and then pops back to the middle and continues moving. So here goes. Syntax error near plus on line 106. So go to, or that little button up there, 106, ball.x, what's wrong with this? This looks right. Syntax error near plus. Oh, it's an else if, not an else. Okay, boop. There we go. It works. We can play the entire game. Let's just check that it works on the other side as well. I'll deliberately miss it. Cool. Okay. We also know our reset function works, so that's good. Next up, we know players are scoring, we know the score is going up, but we don't see anything. So, for the first time in a while, we're going back to our draw function. We need to draw the score. So let's keep it simple for now. To draw text, let's go score. To draw text, we use print. It needs the text that gets printed. It needs an X position, a Y position, a color. Them's the basics. I'll pop up the reference from the cheat sheet with the full syntax because we're going to use the rest of it in a minute. This should at least give us 12 is white, right? Yes, 12 is white. This will at least show the word score in the top left corner of the screen. And run it. Yeah, there's the word score. It seems to be one down from the top. It's not right at the top. Oh, because it's all lowercase. Capital letters would be right up to the top, wouldn't it? Just to make sure. Yeah. Okay. So we know we've got text, but what do we print? We want to print P1 score, then 2 dots like this is to concatenate strings. In Python you can use a plus, but in Lua plus is used with numbers. Then maybe something between them to separate them, and then P2 score. So now it'll show the score in the top left corner. Hey, it went up. Now the other one should go up. Okay, it works. Now we need to make it pretty. So, a couple of things we're going to need is we need to put a bit more details in here. We wanted a fixed font so that, you know, when it goes from 11 to 12, because a 2 is wider than a 1, it keeps everything neatly spaced. So we want it, you know, mono-spaced basically. And then maybe a scale of 2, so it's a bit bigger. See what that looks like? Oh, that looks nice. It sucks that it's in the top left corner. Maybe we should do something about that. And the problem is, as long as the score is single digits in monospace, single digits in fixed width, it'll space nicely, and we can put in an X value for it and position it precisely on the screen. But if the score goes over a single digit, if the score goes up to 10, then suddenly there's more characters on one side of the little hyphen than on the other. So then it's not going to line up. But this print function has an interesting little detail. When you print, if you assign this to a variable, the number you get back is the number of pixels that this text string was long. So, here's a weird idea. I've done this a couple of times in other games. It's always worked. I don't know if it's the accepted way of doing it, but it works for me. Firstly, we're going to have to write that text twice. So let's quickly make a local variable, because it's not going to be used anywhere else, called score text. And in there, we're going to put text that we want to show. Okay, which means now we can just print score TXT and it'll look the same. Score's still there, score's still going up. Okay, next up, this is actually also local. We're not going to need this anywhere outside of this function. Instead of drawing the text straight to screen, I'm going to change its Y value to something crazy. I like using -200. So we draw the text, we print the text to screen, but we print it outside the visible area of the screen so that we can get the length in pixels. Now what do we do with that? We can now take this exact function and print it again. But this X value is now going to be the center of the screen minus half of the length, because we're giving it the X coordinates of the X and Y coordinates of the top left corner of the text, the same as we do when we're drawing squares. So we want 120 minus, technically you don't need the brackets because it will do the dividing before it does the minus, I think, but it's safer this way. Now we can take that length divided by 2. So say for instance the text is 100 pixels long when it's printed way off in the distance. It'll take 120 minus half of that, so 50, and it'll print the left edge there so that it's in the center of the screen. And draw, remember, is being called every frame, every tick. It draws this when it redraws the screen. So it's going to calculate that position every frame, which means if the score goes over 2 digits, it'll immediately have a wider length, and it'll compensate for it. And then also we don't want it drawn off the side of the screen. We want it drawn, it's going to be in the middle, maybe not right at the top, so let's bump it down a little bit. Let's print it at 8 pixels from the top. So we figure out what our text should say. Then we print that text way off screen with all the same parameters and values to get its length. And then we use that length to position it when we write it, when we print it to screen for real. So, hey, why is that off by 1? Why? That seems to be 1 pixel to the left from where it should be. I mean, because we started at 0, 120, because the first space is 0. So 120 is not the middle of the screen, 121 is. That looks better. Okay, now, tiny issue, and I don't know if I'll be able to demonstrate it. I might need to play against myself for a few minutes to get this to happen. But if that score stays there, occasionally the ball is going to go right through the score. Oh, that was a weird bug. There, yes, see, ball went through the screen, through the score, which in this case is not terrible, because I mean it only flashes through for a second, but it is a little distracting. So maybe it would be a good idea if we can. I'm trying to reproduce that bug with the collisions. Oh, there. Oh, I know what's happening. I know what's happening. Oh, I'll get to that in the next episode, because I know exactly what's happening there. What I was saying, I want the score to disappear once the game has started. So I think once the ball has hit a paddle, we know the game is in session and the score can disappear. But how do we make the score disappear? I think the simplest way to do it would be to simply not draw it in a particular case, because this is what draws the score. So if I go if show score, then and put all of this in an if statement, and then somewhere I put a show score function, Boolean variable that I can turn on and off to make the score appear or disappear. So if it goes through the draw function and it hits this point and that value is set to false, it will skip this part and simply not draw the score. And because the screen gets cleared every frame, it just won't be there anymore. So Boolean at the top of the thing. Where did we put the scores? There. So below this I'll just put, didn't I just, oh. Show score equal to true, because at the beginning of the game we do want to show the fact that the score is 0, 0. Then as soon as, back to updates, as soon as someone scores, as soon as it hits a paddle, ball to paddle, if check collision, if something is colliding and the ball changes direction, then it beeps the sound, and then show score equal to false. That'll make the score disappear as soon as the game is in session. And then we wanted to show when someone scores. So instead of adding it to when someone scores, well, I guess we can, but we are calling reset in both these situations, and you do want to show the score when the round resets. So the easiest would probably be to show scores on a reset. Okay, go. Playing, it bounces and the score disappears. So now we're playing, we have the whole field, we can see everything we're doing. Okay, I know what's going on there. Anyway, then someone scores. Huh? Show score, singular. Okay, let's try again. Oops. So, play it like this, score disappears, then someone scores, score shows. We're going to have to do something about that collision detection. It has to do with It has to do with the fact that if the ball is overlapping either paddle, it changes trajectory. So if we somehow manage to place the... I'll explain it when we get there. Okay, priority. I'll move that to the next episode. But for now, let's finish what we're doing. Okay, we're displaying the score. We're positioning it in the middle of the screen. We want a sound, don't we? Okay, what's the sound thing? There's the sound thing. Okay, sound 1, pressing space. That's the ball hitting the edge of the playfield. This one is when a player hits the thing. Then in here we want a sound when someone scores. Happy sound or sad sound? Sad sound. Okay, make it a bit shorter. So just mute it for the rest of the thing. So, and then we haven't really used the arpeggio thing yet, but this, from that note, this alternates, this changes what the note is. So we start high, a little lower, a little lower, a little lower. So this happens really quickly, so you're not going to hear the individual notes. That's good. Can maybe even slow it down a bit. No, that's more of a wave sound. How about this one? No, we'll want to keep it consistent. That's okay. Maybe a bit lower? It's too low. Does this fit the theme? Yeah, that works. Okay. Index 2 for the sound when someone scores. I can probably put that in reset. The problem is then it's going to play whenever we reset, like at the beginning of the game. So we want to put it when someone scores. Open, updates, score, before we reset, SFX2. Copy the line, paste it here. White space. Okay. That's fine. And then it should make the noise. Hey! It even works. Okay. I think that's actually fine for now.